Hello everyone, my name's Bianca and I have a book buying addiction. Hello Inklings, welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking all things book buying. Do you buy more books than you read? And is it a hobby or has it perhaps become an addiction? When I was a little girl, I would buy one book. I would walk into the store with my mum, or maybe someone else would buy a book for me, but I would just have one book at a time. I would read that book, finish it, and then I would ask if we can go to the shops to buy another book. Sometimes the answer was yes, sometimes the answer was not today. Then I became old enough to join a library. I had access to a lot more books. I could take home 3, 4, or 5 books. But at the end of the day, I could only read 1 or 2. Sometimes I would have to return some books unread. I eventually figured out it was easier to just borrow one book at a time and read it and return it. That way I wasn't holding on to books while other people wanted to read them. Let's talk about the rise of book buying culture. Thanks to the internet. As we've gotten older, platforms like Bookstagram, Booktube, BookTok, they've all had a massive impact on reading and book buying and even the publishing industry. We've all been exposed to people having massive book hauls, showing us the latest 5, 10, even 50 books that they bought. Back when I first joined Booktube, I said I was not going to buy any books, I was going to buy secondhand. I said so many things in my Booktube newbie tag and I don't think I stuck to a single one of them, very honestly. Now cut to 5 years later and I have 300 books that I haven't read sitting on my shelves, which is something I never thought would happen, and yet somehow here we are. I definitely think the pandemic had a role to play as well. We all had a lot more anxiety around that time. People turned to online shopping, and I think books was the first culprit for me, and it definitely became an addiction. The social media platforms themselves, they also reward book buying content. It's a lot more exciting watching someone talk about the 10 books that they just bought versus watching someone read one book. Unless they have a really interesting and fun concept, often book hauls gain a lot more interest versus reading blogs, just from what I have seen. They also get a lot more views and sponsorships, like the whole Book of the Month, Book Crate subscriptions. All of those influencers get paid, or they get books for showing off all of the new books. I've also seen people with collections of the same book, which for a minute I fell onto that and I ended up having a couple of copies of the same book until I decided, why? What's the point? There isn't really a point in having a different copy of the same book. So yeah, but I do know people who collect all of the existing editions of books, which is cool for them, but not something I want to do. There is a bit of a pressure on the bookternet if you are a creator to have a very aesthetic looking collection and to have and read the trending books. People will ask you, recommend it to you. So there is that community pressure to have all of the new books. I've also noticed on Bookstagram recently a lot of people's feeds and a lot of new people who have joined in the past few years, a lot of their posts look the same. They're all reading the same books. They have the same aesthetic. It's just become a void or an ocean of sameness. It's really difficult to find people with unique concepts and people who stand out. Let's have a chat about the psychology behind book buying. I don't know if any of you have heard about the concept tsundoku. This is a Japanese concept meaning letting books pile up unread. So this idea of having books and not reading them has been around for a while. There's also people who say having unread books is like having a wine cellar and you read a book when you're ready for it. But personally, I found that quite overwhelming, and When you buy a book, you get a rush of dopamine, which is the pleasure hormone in your brain. It's the same thing that gets activated when you eat junk food, when you eat chocolate, when you online shop. So that instant burst, even getting likes on social media, it's all the same thing. It's a quick rush of feel good. So I realized when I was buying books online, I would do that when I wasn't feeling great. If I had a bad day at work, I would say, oh, you deserve a couple of new books. And in the moment, that would make me feel better. Fast forward to a few weeks later, those books arrived. Get another little rush when I opened that little gift from myself, past self, sent that gift to me. But then I have to go and add those books to my stack of unread books. Book buying is not so different to retail therapy, and I definitely think shopping in general is an addiction. People think that it can fix negative emotions. When we were growing up on the weekends, we would go shopping as a form to socialize. So there is this sense of community and this idea in our society that shopping is a way to heal yourself instead of actually confronting those feelings, which I don't think is necessarily the healthiest thing in the world. I also think having access to e-readers has influenced how we buy books. You can have hundreds of books on a tiny little device, and the convenience of being able to read on a device has made it less likely for me that I will pick up a physical book because, number one, I'm less likely to damage the physical book and it's a lot less cumbersome to carry it around. So what I ended up doing was reading books that I had on my Kindle and then saying, oh, I'll get to those physical books later because I'll always have them. But then I never actually got to them. So I ended up getting into a little cycle, which I'm probably not alone in. There's a financial and emotional impact that this all has. Book buying can definitely turn into overspending. I did not keep track of the amount of money I spent on books. I wasn't really budgeting. I had quite unhealthy spending habits, especially when I got my first job out of uni. I found it really, really stressful just having the job. So I wasn't really keeping an eye on how much I spent because I was making so much more money than what I did before. And that's called lifestyle creep. So sometimes when people earn more, they end up spending more and you forget that you can actually get by on a lot less. So for a little while, that was affecting me, and I definitely bought a lot of books in my first 2 years of having a full-time job compared to any other time in my life. But with that full-time job meant I had a lot less time to read than I did before. So yeah, it didn't really make sense for me to buy more books when I had less time to read. There's also a bit of guilt that surrounds an ever-growing to-be-read pile. I definitely feel a lot of pressure looking at the shelves and seeing all of the books I haven't read yet, so it's easy to just not look at them and avoid it. It becomes a lot more pressure to pick a book. The more books that you accumulate, the harder it becomes to actually try to read all of them, is what I found. There is also a difference between collecting books and reading books, for sure. So some people might really love a book and they want to collect the same book with multiple editions, but there's only one story existing in all of the books. Some people love buying books just based on what they look like. So if they see a really pretty book, they might buy that, and they maybe have never even read the books. I also ended up buying box sets of books because in my brain that was cheaper than buying each of those books individually. But I didn't even know whether or not I liked the series because I hadn't even read the first book. So I definitely think buying books and reading books is not the same. You can have a giant bookshelf, but that does not mean that you have read all of the books, and I've definitely not read all of the books that I own. You might also feel pressure to buy books for a different version of you, like your ideal person. Like you want to be someone who classics and non-fiction, but maybe you are someone who just loves a good romance and that's all you really want to read. So you never end up reading any of the classics or non-fiction. And that's okay. It might be time to get rid of the classics and non-fiction and just read and buy what you actually want to read. Same thing for clothes. You might buy clothes for a different version of you. Maybe someone who dresses a bit more professionally or someone who is a different weight. Don't buy things for a version of you that doesn't exist. It never goes well and you just end up feeling guilty when you don't actually want to read those things or wear the things. There is definitely a solution to this. I think we can definitely be a lot more mindful with our book purchases, facing the reasons behind buying books. Are you buying it because you genuinely want to read the book? But also, do you have other books that you genuinely want to read that you already own that you haven't read yet? Might be a good idea to read those first and then buy other books. Are you reading because you want to keep up with the crowds? Have all of your friends read this book and you don't want to be the only one who hasn't read it? And that could also be people that you don't actually talk to. Do you feel pressure from the Bookstagram or Book Talk community to buy those books? Do you just buy things for readathons? That was a big thing where people just started reading based on prompts. I ended up reading probably at least 50 books that I had no interest in reading just for the readathon, just for that community experience. And yeah, I don't think that was really great for my reading in general. It's more rewarding for me when I read books that I genuinely want to read. You can go on a book buying ban. I've done that for the past 7 months now. I only bought one book for Christmas, but I haven't bought any other new books in the past 7 months. And I've actually not felt the urge to buy a new book in quite a while. I've been making use of online services if I do want to read books that I don't own on my shelves, so I can still read books that I don't own. There are lots of ways to do it. Libraries, little free libraries, borrowing books from friends. And I also confronted my Amazon addiction. It was just too easy. I ended up signing up for that before I really knew much about the company, but I've since made an effort to stop supporting them, so I've cancelled my Audible, cancelled Amazon. I use Libro FM and Libby and Everand for my audiobooks because I do need audiobooks when I drive. I can't not have an audiobook. It just makes my drive a lot easier. I drive like an hour to work, so it is a bit of a drive. I've also found that people are moving more towards underconsumption and wanting to be more mindful, and I definitely think we are not alone in feeling that way. There are other creators and other people with similar mindsets, people doing low buy years. I've been loving Diaries of Creativity on Bookstagram and she's been making videos on YouTube. I found a giant community of people doing the TBR 0 challenge, so it's definitely not just a me problem. If you are feeling overwhelmed, there's definitely a light at the end of the tunnel. I'm feeling so much better about my reading in general, and I've made some really amazing friends along the way. We can also support our local bookstores and local authors a lot more. I definitely think that I have not done that enough. I haven't made buying a book an experience, and I think going to a bookstore and buying a book in person is totally different to just clicking a button online. So I think taking that time for myself and going out and buying books again one day, walking through the library, picking up books to borrow, I really miss that tangible aspect of things and the ease and convenience of online shopping. It just removes so much from the human experience. Thank you so much for watching up to here. If you have, please leave a book stack emoji in the comments. Let me know, do you think that book buying is just a fun hobby, or can it become an addiction? How has social media influenced your book buying habits? Happy reading, Inklings, not buying. I'll see you next time. Bye!